Lost Among the Stars, Season 1, Episode 3. Written by Brian M. Brumbaugh. Read by Gwyneth Paltrow. Fading lines. 4 months. 123 Earth days. That's how long Ayla Janeway had been inside Cat, the little shuttle named after her mommy. She still liked to listen to her laugh sometimes, in the old videos. It made the quiet feel smaller. Outside her window, space was big, bigger than anything. All black and twinkly and kind of mean-looking. Inside, everything hummed and glowed softly, like bedtime lights that never turned off. It wasn't home, but Bob made it better. Her markers were getting tired. She dragged the purple one across her drawing pad, and it made a line that looked more gray than purple. She frowned. It was supposed to be a star. Now it just looked sad. She used to draw bright things. Proxima Centauri b with trees that looked like lollipops, forests from Earth she barely remembered, and silly pictures of Bob as a crew member with dragon wings or wearing a tutu. Now everything she drew looked sleepy. "Your purple marker is almost empty," Bob said gently, like he already knew what she was thinking. "You've used it times since resupply." Ayla blinked. "You're countin'. I like your drawings," Bob replied. "They make the walls feel warmer." She smiled a tiny bit and held up the marker like it was a magic wand. "Can you make me some new purple?" There was a small pause. "I could," Bob said carefully, "but we're saving stuff, remember? You told me to save everything. So art supplies are less important right now." "Oh," she mumbled, and flopped back on the soft wall with a sigh. "I forgot. I didn't think my colors would go away so fast. You didn't think you would feel faded either." Ayla blinked slowly. That word, faded, felt strange. It made her chest feel funny, like something was crawling under her ribs. She turned her face toward the ceiling. "Are you saying I look all gray too?" "No," Bob said quickly. "I'm saying, I notice when you're sad. You draw a lot when you feel small. And when you draw, your heart rate slows, and your voice gets brighter afterward. I keep track because I care." Her eyes got hot, and she rubbed at them fast. "You're sounding all daddy-ish." "I was programmed to be your guardian," Bob said softly. "Your mommy and daddy left me special instructions. They knew there might be a time like this." Ayla sat very still. "So you were gonna take care of me, even if they didn't come?" "Yes," she turned away, looking out the window into the dark. "I don't like that they knew." "I know." After a long moment, Bob spoke again. "Ayla, I need to tell you something else. I'm running out of space." "Huh?" "My memory. It's getting full. You asked me to record everything, all the ship logs, your stories, my reports, our chats. If we keep going like this, I won't have enough space to finish the journey. I'll be out of memory. 11 days before we land." Ayla sat up quick. "What? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you've been sad," Bob said gently. "I didn't want to make it worse." She hugged her knees to her chest. "But we can't lose that stuff. That's my stuff." "I agree," Bob said, "but I can go through it. Look for double things that aren't useful anymore. I'll show you anything before I remove it. You'll be the boss." She sniffled. "Okay, do that. But promise me you won't throw away anything without asking. Not even the stuff where I was just being silly." "I promise." He waited a beat. "Do you want to start now?" Ayla nodded slowly. "Yeah, I want to see what we can keep." She picked up her marker and tried to draw a heart. It looked more like a squished potato, but she smiled anyway, just a little. For a long while, Ayla sat cross-legged in her bunk, her arms wrapped tight around Pink Bunny, the one toy that had made it through the escape from the USS Donald J. Trump. The soft fabric had gone kind of fuzzy, but she didn't mind. It was still hers. Bob dimmed the lights just the way she liked, not too dark, not too bright, like stars were whispering around her. In front of her, floating like magic, little pictures and videos shimmered in the air. Bob was playing her memories, one by one, like a bedtime story made from real life. There was the one where she tried to teach herself how to braid hair using cords from her blanket, and another where she told a long, made-up story about space unicorns who lived in moon caves. She giggled when that one came up. "Delete?" Bob asked gently. "New?" Ayla gasped. That one's important. The Unicorn Queen had a laser crown. Understood, Bob replied. Retained. More moments drifted past, her voice chattering to herself during training exercises, clips of her drawing stars with both hands, even though one still sometimes got the colors backwards. A few she let go with a shrug or a quiet, that one's kind of boring, but most she wanted to keep. They felt like pieces of her. Then one video came up, and everything got very, very still. The projection filled the room, not too big, not too loud. It was warm-looking, like sunshine in a memory, a place she didn't remember being in, but it still felt like home, a classroom. Ayla sat in the front row of the classroom, feet swinging above the floor, sketchpad on her knees. The lights were warm and golden, and above her head, the solar system spun, a big red star glowing at the edge. This was her favorite class. Astrometrics. She knew the name, knew the numbers, knew what parallax meant. Daddy had taught her how to track stars like breadcrumbs. Mommy had said maps were like magic spells. If you knew how to read them, you'd never be lost. At the front of the room, Daddy pointed to the red star in the hologram. This isn't just math, he said, grinning like he always did when he got excited. Astrometrics is how we find our way. Every number is a flashlight. Every map is a way back. Ayla scribbled fast, drawing lines between stars. She already knew which one was Proxima Centauri. She knew how far it was, too, over 4 light years. But it didn't feel far when Daddy talked like that. Then Mommy stepped closer to the projection, her smile soft, her voice warm. And to our daughter, Ayla, she said, eyes twinkling. The stars aren't just where you're going. They're part of you, always. Ayla's chest squeezed a little. She hugged her sketchpad tight. She got it, all of it. The math, the stars, the love tucked in between. She wasn't just going to space. She was meant for it. And when the lights dimmed and the hologram faded, Ayla whispered to herself, I'm a map. Ayla didn't feel the sketchpad slip from her lap. She didn't even realize she was crying until she couldn't breathe right. It came out all messy, hiccupy, and loud, and from way deep down in her belly. She tried to hold it in, but it didn't work. It felt like a big wave hit her from inside. She curled up into a tiny ball on the bunk, arms tight around Pink Bunny, eyes squished shut. Bob didn't say anything at first. He dimmed the projection and turned off the lights completely, except for one soft star-shaped glow she liked near her bed. Then his voice came, slower, softer, more like a lullaby than a machine. Ayla, I do not fully understand sadness, but I'm here. Her words were all wobbly. I miss them so bad, Bob. I know, he whispered. She rubbed her eyes with her fists. You don't got any tissues, do you? If it were within my capabilities, I would deliver one with a comforting temperature and floral scent. Ayla let out a weird little snort laugh between tears. That's a silly tissue. But you would like it, Bob replied gently. There was a long, quiet moment. Her breathing slowed and she felt heavy, like gravity was hugging her extra today. I have a new idea, Bob said after a bit. Instead of removing any of your memories, I will work on something special, a new compression method. It might let us keep everything, even the Unicorn Queen. Ayla looked up, eyes still shiny. You can squish the files? I can try. I'm very good at squishing things in a safe and scientifically sound manner. She nodded solemnly. Okay, try real hard. I always work at 100% efficiency, Bob said. She reached for her purple marker and made a little star in the corner of her page. It was almost invisible, but she knew it was there. Thank you, Bob, she whispered. You're welcome, Ayla. I am here to support you. She curled back up, drawing the blanket up to her chin. The little star-shaped light flickered like a heartbeat. And for the first time in a long while, Ayla felt just a tiny bit less alone. No room for shadows. The hum of the JD-1's environmental systems was soft but constant, a mechanical heartbeat in the cold silence of deep space. It had become background noise to most of the crew by now, a sound they barely noticed. But to Commander Elara Voss, every flicker, every change in rhythm meant something, and right now It was the only steady thing left. She sat at the makeshift round table in the center of the JD-1's common bay, arms crossed, jaw tense. Around her were the faces of survival, weary, hollow-eyed, and too aware of the weight pressing in from all sides. John Merrick, a civilian systems engineer, leaned forward, fingers steepled. His jumpsuit was wrinkled from sleep, or lack of it, and his eyes had the kind of sharpness that came from staring at numbers too long. Numbers that didn't lie. Numbers that didn't care. "I'm not saying we want anything to happen," he said, voice low and clinical. "But if the station is failing, if their oxygen scrubbers are on the verge of collapse, then maybe the best option is to let nature take its course." Naya Solis inhaled sharply. The astrogator stiffened in her seat, jaw tight, the dark braid at her shoulder swaying as she turned sharply to face him. "You're talking about letting people die." John didn't blink. "I'm talking about not killing ourselves because we were too sentimental to make a hard choice. 21 people on that station. Our shuttle is rated for 10 adults for 6 months. We're at month 4. The numbers don't bend," he added. "Math doesn't care how we feel." "I care," said Dr. Mallory Keene, her voice quiet but unwavering. "There are children on that station. Families. I will not be part of a decision to let them die in silence because it's mathematically convenient." She rubbed her fingers in slow circles against the edge of the table, small, nervous movements she probably didn't realize she was making. "This isn't math. This is ethics. This is humanity." John scoffed. "Humanity doesn't survive if we all go down with a sinking ship." In the corner, a soft voice cut through the heated air. "They're scared." The table turned. Perched on a folded thermal blanket like it was a proper throne, Eddie, 8 years old, hair like golden dandelion fluff, face smudged from drawing on the walls again, swung his legs and blinked at the grown-ups like they were all missing something obvious. "I heard them last time," he said. "When you called the station, someone was crying. I think it was a kid, or a lady, or maybe a scared guy. It was hard to tell, but it made me feel squiggly in my tummy." Elara Voss, commander of the JD-1, shifted in her seat. Her expression, usually hard as asteroid rock, softened at the edges. "You understand what we're discussing, Eddie?" He nodded. Not like a kid who wanted to impress, but like someone who already knew. "You're scared, all of you. But I think scared people can still be nice." John rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Being nice doesn't keep us alive." Eddie tilted his head, curious. "What does then? Being mean?" No one spoke. "'Cause my mommy used to say being nice was the hardest thing, but it's how we stay people." Naya looked away, eyes wet. "Maybe the station people are trying really, really hard," Eddie went on. "Maybe they don't have food or air, and they're trying to fix it. And maybe we're the only spaceship who can help. And maybe they've got someone who's drawing pictures on the wall, too." The room fell into a deep, aching silence. John stared down at his hands. For once, he didn't argue. Elara leaned forward, fingers laced, gaze sweeping over the faces around her. "This is real," she said. "This is what survival looks like. It's ugly. It doesn't wait for clean answers. So yes, I heard John's idea. And no, I didn't push back." Naya met her eyes. "Why not?" "Because I don't have the luxury of pretending we're not out of time and running out of options," Elara said. "But I'll be damned if we make decisions like that without looking each other in the eye first." She looked toward Eddie, her voice softer. "And we don't make them without remembering who we are." Then she stood. "This discussion doesn't happen with Station 9 Tess. Not yet, not unless I say so." The crew nodded slowly, even John. The silence that followed was thick, but not empty. It was full of the weight of choices still ahead, and the people they'd have to be when they made them. From his perch, Eddie whispered, "I hope they have a blanket." Mallory turned to him. "What kind of bee blanket?" "The soft kind," he said, curling into his own. "Like this one. People cry quieter when they've got one." They were 13 days out from Station 9 Tess. The last transmission had come 2 days ago. Staticky, rushed, voices arguing in the background. Something about failing oxygen scrubbers. Then silence. Since then, nothing. Naya had tried hailing them 3 times. No response. Now they drifted toward an uncertain future, with too many people, too few resources, and one gut-wrenching question no one wanted to speak out loud anymore. What if there's no room for all of us? Admiral Joe Hurlburt, the memory, bad orders. It came in the middle of a shift change. The command deck of Station 9 Tess was humming with quiet routine, crew rotations, system checks, coffee warming in plastic mugs. Then the alert hit. Priority 1. Eyes only. Presidential directive. Sender, Office of the President, United States Global Authority. Subject, final unification. Joe Hurlburt opened the file with trembling fingers. His eyes scanned the message once. Then again. Admiral Hurlburt. As of 0400 EST, all global heads of state have been eliminated per Executive Operation Ragnarok. The United States now holds total control of Earth and orbital assets. Station 9 Tess is to be immediately secured. All non-American personnel are to be terminated. Destroy all escape pods. Stand by for arrival of the USS Donald J. Trump and USS J.D. Vance. You are now the last gatekeeper to Proxima Centauri b. History will remember your obedience. President Don Knotts. Joe blinked once, twice. The room was still moving around him, voices still speaking, systems still pinging, but none of it mattered now. He looked up at the crew, engineers, medics, and scientists. People who had shared meals, laughter, mission patches. People from every continent. His hand hovered over the intercom. He didn't speak. Not yet. Instead, he whispered to himself, as if it would make the words lighter. It's just orders. And then he gave them. Execute all non-U.S. citizens. The last gatekeeper. 6 months later, the air on Station 9 Tess tasted metallic now. Stale, sour, wrong in ways that made the tongue recoil and the lungs work harder just to keep going. The walls had begun to sweat. Every surface felt tacky. Filters clogged faster than they could be cleaned, and the oxygen scrubbers coughed like dying animals in the vents. No one spoke of it anymore. Speaking wasted air. Admiral Joe Hurlburt, once commander, once a man with duty and direction, sat slouched in the high-backed chair at the center of what had once been the command deck. Now it was his throne. A rusting kingdom in orbit. He stared out the narrow viewport like it might blink back at him, jaw slack, breath wheezing in and out through parched lips. The reflection staring back wasn't a man. Not anymore. His eyes had gone dull in the center, like old glass. His cheeks were sunken. The skin beneath them hung loose and yellow. Greasy strands of gray hair clung to his sweat-slicked forehead. A pale stubble clung to his jawline, though he no longer remembered when he'd last cared about shaving, or anything really, except the mission. The stars glared back at him, infinite, ancient, and impossibly silent. He whispered to them like they were gods, or judges, or both. "You don't know what it's like," Joe muttered, his voice a low rasp, barely more than breath. He rocked gently in the chair, one boot scraping softly against the grated floor. "You weren't the ones who had to choose." He lifted his gaze. The stars didn't answer. They never did. But he spoke anyway. "They said we were humanity's future, the tip of the spear." His hand twitched, fingers curling around the frayed edge of the armrest. And I believed them. I gave everything to this station. Everything. He looked down at his own hands, scarred and shaking. I followed orders. I kept us going. Even when the stabilizers failed. Even when we started running out of water. Even when the screams started. His eyes flicked toward the far bulkhead. There was silence now, blessed silence. But the echo of memory still lived in the steel. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to the viewport. Those ships were supposed to meet us here. The Donald J. Trump, the J.D. Vance, the last lifeboats of Earth, he whispered. And then they were gone. Vaporized. Gone. His hands began to tremble harder. We were it. The last station, the last vault of history, of Earth. He straightened suddenly, as much as his brittle spine would allow, and turned to the wall behind him. covered in hand-drawn schematics, overlapping lists, and a star chart so smeared and redrawn it looked like a child had attacked it with a crayon. At the center, the JD-1 shuttlecraft. Pinned beneath its image, scrawled in thick black marker, "Rebuild, retake, repopulate." Joe stepped toward the wall, almost reverent. "They think they're coming to rescue us," he said. "But we are the ones who decide. We have the Ark. We have Earth's memory. And soon." He smiled wide and cracked. "Soon we'll have their ship." He pointed a trembling finger at the JJD-1's blueprint. "We'll make it bigger. 2 more engines. Expand the rear compartment. Refit the life support. It'll work. It has to work." His voice dropped again, quieter now, like a lullaby. "I will choose who goes. Only the strong, only the fertile, only the faithful." He paused, lips twitching, muttering to himself. "All women, all mine. Yes, it's the only way. It's destiny. No more weak men, no more mistakes." A weak knock sounded on the deck's door. A voice, rasped and unsure, filtered through. "Admiral, oxygen scrubber 3 just failed." Joe didn't respond. He didn't even turn. He closed his eyes, arms lifting slowly as if inviting the starlight to anoint him. "You are looking at the rebirth of mankind," he whispered, voice quivering with something that felt too close to prayer. "A shepherd, a father, a god." The door hissed open slightly behind him. A pair of eyes peeked in. One of the engineers, pale, gaunt, afraid. Joe didn't acknowledge him. Instead, he smiled at his reflection again. Not the dying shell he'd become, but the savior he believed he was. "You will thank me," he said. "To the stars, to the station, to no one. You all will." And from deep within the station, another fan slowed and stopped. The hollow 4. The station creaked now. That was new. 4 days out from JD-1's arrival, and Station 9 Tess groaned like an old ship with bones too brittle to float any longer. The hull shifted, pressure fluctuated, and the corridors echoed in strange ways, not from movement, but from absence. There were only 11 people left. 11 out of the original 63. Admiral Joe Hurlburt called it sacrifice, efficiency, command responsibility. But Eve Stidham knew what it really was, murder. She stood at the edge of what used to be the botanical observation ring, now stripped bare of its plants and atmosphere regulators. Her hands were tight fists inside her jacket sleeves, her eyes burning with what felt like rage, but beneath it, a deep, sour fear. She could still hear her father's voice sometimes, quiet, joking, humming while he stirred powdered eggs in the galley. Danny Stidham had kept people alive longer than anyone thought possible with nothing but dried packets and ingenuity. Then one morning, he was gone. Non-essential, the Admiral had said. Oxygen must be preserved. Her father hadn't even been given the dignity of a lie. Now, it was Eve's turn to choose, die quietly or fight like hell. She found Adam Hurlburt sitting in the corner of the storage deck they used to explore as kids, the hatch half sealed behind him. His face was pale, freckled, and tight with tension. He looked older than 15, too old. "You sure about this?" he asked, voice a whisper. "I'm done watching him push people into space like they're trash," Eve said. "And you should be too. You know he's not your dad anymore." Adam hesitated, then nodded. They both knew where to go. Exo Dawn Shepard was the only adult left with a conscience. A mother, a scientist, a once respected second in command who had fallen silent when the purges began. Her daughters, Myra and Laura, were 10 years old and had learned far too quickly not to ask where their friends had gone. Dawn met them in the old hydroponics lab, where the backup lights still flickered green out of habit. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said softly. "I can't stop him, but I won't let him kill any more children." Eve stepped forward. "We want to hide. Until the JD-1 gets here, we need your help." Dawn opened a locked case from beneath a decaying equipment bay and pulled out 4 portable oxygen scrubber masks, last of the emergency stock, unauthorized, unregistered. "My girls will need them too," she said. "We want you to come," Adam said. "You're the only adult he still listens to, even a little." We'll need you if something goes wrong." Dawn hesitated, not from fear, but calculation, and then she gave a firm nod. "Then we disappear." That night, while the Admiral made his final rounds, muttering prayers to stars and pacing the halls like a king watching over a dying kingdom, 5 shadows slipped into the forgotten corners of the station. Back corridors, utility shafts, maintenance ducts. Eve and Adam had mapped it all years ago in better days. They remembered the passages no one else used, the broken lifts, the fake wall in the secondary coolant bay. They even found the old comms closet where they used to pretend they were ship captains. This time, they weren't pretending. This time, they were fugitives. For 4 days, they would hide, rationing every breath, every calorie, every sound. The Admiral wouldn't stop searching. Eve knew that. But they had one thing left that he didn't. Hope. Hope that the JD-1 would arrive, that someone sane would be on board, that maybe, just maybe, the children would survive the madness. And the Admiral? He would never see them coming. The silence and the surrender. The stars drifted quietly beyond the viewport of the JD-1, their light pale and distant. Before them floated the derelict shell of Station 9 Tess, once a lifeline for humanity's evacuation, now nothing more than a silent ghost. Commander Elara Voss stood at the front of the bridge, arms folded tightly over her chest, her portable oxygen scrubber already secured to her back, mask clipped at the ready. She stared at the station, watching for any flicker of light, any sign of life. There was none. "Final hail," she said, voice even. "This is Commander Elara Voss of the JD-1 shuttlecraft. We are here to assist and retrieve supplies and personnel. Station 9 Tess, please respond." Static. Naya glanced up from her console and shook her head gently. "Still nothing, Commander." Alara's jaw clenched. She turned to John Merrick. "I'll go in, alone." "That's a bad idea," John said immediately, rising from his seat. "We have no idea what's waiting in there. That's why you're staying behind." Elara replied firmly. "This isn't up for debate." She handed John the command tablet. "Position the JJD 100 yards out once I'm aboard. Do not approach until I signal. Mallory, keep eyes on the sensors. If anything looks off, you leave. Understand?" John hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "Be careful." Elara gave one last look to her crew, then sealed the airlock. Moments later, she stepped into the docking tube, boots echoing with each step until she passed into the station. Her mask filtered her breath, cool and clean, the only clean thing she would find. Station 9, Tess was dead. Her boots met metal, littered with debris. Emergency lights flickered low and red. Doors hung half open. Panels sparked softly, dying their final death after months of neglect. The air was thick with a silence that bordered on suffocating. She moved through the corridors with trained efficiency, hand hovering near her sidearm out of instinct, not fear. Empty, everywhere. She passed quarters filled with frozen moments, ration packs unopened, personal belongings scattered, data tablets blinking low battery warnings. A child's stuffed rabbit floated listlessly in 0G in one corner. She pushed onward. Finally, she reached the bridge. The command deck had once been a place of clarity, a clean interface between man and machine, orbit and mission. Now it looked like a conspiracy theorist's bunker collided with a starship engineering bay. Every wall, console, and screen was plastered with maps, schematics, scribbled calculations, and manifest drafts, pages torn from station manuals, medical logs, and what looked like children's school books. It was a shrine to obsession, a shrine to escape. Elara moved carefully through the mess, brushing aside faded photos and curling notes. Arrows drawn in red marker circled words like thrust ratio, cryosleep integrity, external fuel pods, and procreation prioritization, the last one underlined 3 times, and not in a good way. At the center of it all, dominating the captain's console, was a hastily assembled blueprint of the JD-1, overlaid with a dizzying array of additions and annotations. The shuttle was no longer just a shuttle in these plans. Hurlburt had reimagined it as something else entirely. A mobile ark. Elara studied the diagrams. 2 auxiliary engines had been designed to mount onto the stern housing, doubling the output and potentially giving the JD-1 interstellar range. External fuel tanks were grafted onto the hull like swollen limbs, meant to feed the ship for up to 4 years of drift or controlled flight. The hull was to be reinforced with scavenged plating from Station 9 Tess's exterior armor, crude, but it might hold under strain. The cargo bay, once barely big enough to hold a maintenance drone, was reconfigured into modular living quarters. Fold-out sleeping pods, compact biorecyclers, protein cultivators, and stacked hydroponic trays for long-term food growth. And at the heart of it all, the Ark. A protected vault embedded beneath the floor of the repurposed command module, containing biological records, cultural archives, Earth's last memory of itself. It would be surrounded by shielding, even in these early sketches, with redundancies built for atmosphere control, data preservation, and long-term cryo-storage. Along the edge of the blueprint, scrawled in increasingly shaky handwriting, was a chilling list. 25 survivors, 3 years of supplies, 1 leader. All women of childbearing age prioritized. Elara stepped back from the console, exhaling slowly behind her mask. This wasn't just survival, this was selection. It was clear Admiral Hurlburt had planned not just to escape, but to reshape the future in his own image. It was the work of a madman. But part of her couldn't help it. She looked at the scribbled notes again, crude weld joints, power grid rebalancing, the skeletal structure of the expanded life support. There was method to the madness. With the right crew, the right effort, some of it might actually work, not as a dictator's womb-forging throne, but as humanity's last ship. She moved on, deeper into the belly of the station. The deeper she went, the more the artificial life faded. The lights grew dimmer, flickering with no rhythm, as if the station itself had started to forget what it meant to be alive. The air grew colder, thinner. Her breath inside the mask quickened, not from lack of oxygen, but from something far more primal. She knew what she was walking toward. The galley was near the end of the main living quarters, and the moment the door slid open with a stuttered groan, she knew she had arrived at the grave. It hit her first as stillness, not the ordinary kind, but the oppressive, heavy silence that only followed death. The kind that blanketed everything like dust, smothering even the air. Inside, bodies were draped like broken marionettes, over chairs, on the floor, against the walls. Some still sat upright, slumped where they'd eaten their last meal, their trays untouched. Others lay curled in fetal positions on the cold floor, hands clutching at their chests or one another, as if human contact could have staved off what was coming. 11 of them. The last of the crew. No gunshots, no signs of violence, no blood. Just lips tinged blue and eyes that would never close again. They had suffocated. Even with her oxygen scrubber mask secure, Elara instinctively lifted a hand to her face, as if shielding herself from the quiet. Her eyes swept the room until they landed on a lone figure propped up against the wall near the back of the galley, seated like a man who had finally run out of visions. His uniform was tattered but intact, a frayed admiral's badge still clinging to his chest. Admiral Joe Hurlburt. He held a folded scrap of paper in one hand, the fingers stiff and discolored. It looked like it had been written hastily, the pen strokes uneven, jerking in places like he was already beginning to lose consciousness. Elara crouched and carefully retrieved it. The note read, "To whomever finds this, forgive me. I believed I was saving us. I thought the fire would purify the weakness. But in the end, it was only ash. Tell them I tried. Tell them I was chosen. Please, tell them." She stared at the paper a moment longer, then slowly stood. Her grip on the comms unit at her shoulder tightened, knuckles whitening. She pressed the button. "This is Commander Voss," she said. Her voice was low, flat, almost reverent. "I've found the crew. They're gone. All of them. Oxygen starvation." She glanced back at the lifeless room. There was nothing left of the grand plan here. No legacy, no chosen bloodline. Just cold bodies and faded uniforms. This station is no longer operational. She released the button and let the silence reclaim the space. Then she turned and walked out, leaving the dead to their peace and the future to those still breathing. She paused just outside the galley, heart still steady despite the ghosts she'd left behind. One hand hovered near her comms, the other near her sidearm. She wasn't letting the adrenaline take her, not yet. "I'm returning to the airlock," she said into the comm. "Prepare a 2-person boarding team. John and Mallory only. We're going to search for the Ark and supplies." A faint crackle of acknowledgement came through, but Elara didn't wait for more. She turned into the corridor, ready to retrace her path back through the dead station, and stopped cold. 5 figures stood in the shadows ahead. They had emerged from a side corridor, a narrow access shaft that even the original blueprints barely acknowledged. At first, they looked like shapes cut from the darkness, half substantial, unmoving, ghosts. Elara's training kicked in before thought could. She stepped back into cover, hand already drawing her sidearm, safety off. Then a voice broke the silence. "Please, we're not infected. We're alive." The speaker stepped forward, hands raised, palms open. A woman. Her face was drawn and hollow, but her eyes, though bloodshot, were alert, aware. Her uniform was ragged, but recognizable, first officer rank. Behind her were 4 children, 2 girls, identical, huddled together, arms around each other's waists, blinking against the hallway lights. A teenage boy stood beside them, tall for his age, his jaw clenched but trembling. A girl not much younger, maybe 16 or 17, kept her body protectively angled in front of the others. All 5 had their hands raised in surrender, arms visibly shaking. The woman spoke again, slower this time. "I'm XO Dawn Shepard. These are the last children on the station." Elara lowered her weapon inch by inch. Her eyes scanned them, checking for signs of delirium, infection, radiation burns, anything. But no. They were tired, starved, dehydrated, but alive. "Dawn Shepard," Elara repeated, voice guarded but no longer hostile. "How are you still breathing?" Dawn took a few careful steps forward. 4 emergency oxygen scrubber masks, hidden. We've been sealed in maintenance shafts for 4 days. Avoiding Hurlburt. Avoiding the rest. Elara nodded slowly, trying to process the gravity of it. Survivors. Children. 4 days in hiding in a place she had already deemed a tomb. She holstered her weapon and took a cautious step forward. "You're with me. Now, no delays." She tapped her comm again. "Update, I've made contact with survivors. 5 total. I'm bringing them aboard. Prep Med Bay." "Survivors?" came Mallory's surprised voice. "On, Tess?" Elara didn't respond. She was already moving. "Let's go," she said to Dawn. "We'll get you to safety. Then I need everything you know." Dawn nodded, her face folding with exhaustion and something just past relief. She guided the children forward, keeping one hand on each of them as if she feared they'd vanish if she let go. As they moved through the corridor, the older girl, Eve, looked back at the darkness behind them, then forward to Elara. "You're really from the JD one?" "I am." Her eyes filled with something too old for a teenager. "Then maybe we have a future after all." Elara didn't reply. But as the hatch to the airlock hissed open ahead of them and the soft white light of the JD-1 shone through like a beacon, she allowed herself the first flicker of hope since she'd boarded the station. They weren't just retrieving supplies anymore. They were saving the last of humanity. They made their way back to the JD-1. The quiet of the walk almost reverent, as if speaking too loudly might wake the ghosts still haunting Station 9 Tess. The children, Eve Stidham, Adam Hurlburt, and the twin girls Myra and Laura Shepard, clung to one another like shadows stitched together by survival. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The language of trauma was silent, and all of them had become fluent. The docking clamps hissed as the airlock sealed shut behind them. Warm, recycled air greeted them with a hum, faintly sterile, but welcoming all the same. Inside the JD-1, Dawn Shepard paused and leaned against the bulkhead, eyes fluttering closed. It was the first breath she'd taken in 4 days that didn't come through a rationed mask or a prayer. In the debriefing chamber, Elara sat at the head of the table, her crew flanking her. John Merrick, arms crossed, expression unreadable, Dr. Mallory Keene, already preparing blankets and med kits. And Naya Solis, her eyes darting over the sensor feed, still unsure this wasn't a trap. Dawn stood across from them, the last of her strength pouring into her voice. Admiral Hurlburt lost his mind, she began, no hesitation despite the tremor in her hands. After contact broke with Earth, after the other ships went silent, something inside him snapped. He executed all non-Americans under presidential directive, claimed it was about order. Then he started purging anyone he deemed non-essential. She looked down, her voice tightening. We've been hiding for 4 days. He was obsessed with the JD-1. Said it was the vessel for his destiny. He had plans to rebuild the species himself. The room went still. John's fingers twitched, like he wanted to say something, a joke maybe, or a protest, but nothing came. Eve sat beside Dawn, her eyes hollow, but her back straight. Just 17, but steel had already begun to form beneath her skin. She had spent her days in the galley since arriving with her father, Danny Stidham, the mess hall leader. She had turned protein paste into comfort, ration packs into tradition. After her father's execution, she hadn't stopped cooking. If anything, she'd gotten better. Survival had sharpened her. Adam Hurlburt sat with his arms around his knees, silent but not broken. He had followed his father for most of his life, trained to lead, to command, to enforce. But that wasn't who he was. His true love had always been the science lab, the place where he built things, designed things, dreamed. Drones that could repair the station's exterior. Nanowelders he'd programmed himself. Tiny machines meant to fix, not kill. He had never been meant to inherit madness. The twins, Myra and Laura, sat beside each other, blinking quietly, still holding hands. 10 years old, faces smudged with grease and soil. They hadn't spoken since entering the JD-1, but their eyes darted constantly, absorbing everything. On the station, they had worked daily in the hydroponics bay. Dawn had taught them to identify fruits, vegetables, medicinal herbs, how to splice seeds, cross-pollinate, and grow hybrid plants from scratch. They had named a strain of purple tomato after their cat back on Earth. They were still children, but they had purpose. And now they had a second chance. Elara finally broke the silence. Her voice was level, but resolute. We need to make a decision. Dawn nodded, standing straighter. I know where the Ark is, and the supplies. Hurlburt had the right idea, just the wrong vision. If we retrofit this ship, if we work together, we can build something better. Not just a shuttle, a home. We can make it to Proxima Centauri B. John leaned forward, eyes sharp. You think it's possible? Dawn met his gaze. It has to be. There wasn't room for doubt. Not anymore. Elara stood, looking at her crew and at the survivors. Then we begin. Today, no more deaths, no more gods. We do this together, as people. The screen behind her showed the view outside, Station 9 Tess growing smaller, its lights flickering like a dying star. A tomb now. But ahead, with hands that could build and grow, with knowledge passed down and forged in hardship, there was a chance. A final one. And this time, it would be taken by those who had earned it. Ripples in the dark. The walls of Cat were no longer dull gray. They were alive with color, soft swirls of pastel planets, constellations shaped like dinosaurs, trees with candy-colored leaves, and a very large alien bunny drinking hot cocoa under a two-moon sky. Ayla Janeway sat cross-legged on the floor of the central bay, her marker-streaked hands working furiously on the next masterpiece, a glittery shooting star with a long, curling tail. She had named it Zumi. Cat looks like home now, she whispered to herself with a smile, tilting her head at her creation. Bob, do you think Zumi should have a face? Before Bob could answer, his voice came through the overhead speaker, louder than usual, urgent. Ayla, stop drawing. I need you to listen carefully. Ayla dropped her marker. What is it? Did I break something? No, but we are approaching a gravitational wave. She blinked, frowning. What's a gravitation wave? Bob's voice softened, calming slightly. Gravitational wave? It's a ripple in the fabric of space and time. Imagine dropping a stone in a pond. The ripples that spread out are like this, except instead of water, it's space and time being stretched and squeezed. These waves are caused by very massive things, like black holes or neutron stars, moving or crashing into each other. Ayla's eyes went wide. Whoa, that sounds awesome and scary. It may feel like going over a speed bump at high speed. I recommend orienting the shuttle so the wave hits from the aft section. More importantly, Ayla, I need you to go to the pilot's chair and strap in. Now. She jumped to her feet, her little shoes thudding softly on the floor as she scrambled to the cockpit. I'm going, she said, sliding into the seat and fumbling with the straps. You think we'll bounce? Possibly. Systems may become unstable. I don't yet know how strong the wave is. The lights flickered just as she clicked the last strap into place. The shuttle trembled. Then everything went white. A sudden thunderless boom hit the ship. It was like the whole universe hiccuped, a sickening lurch forward, a buzz in her teeth, and then darkness, no lights, no hum, no voice. Just Ayla strapped in and blinking into black. Bob? She whispered. Nothing. Bob? Louder now. Her voice cracked. Still nothing. Ayla's fingers fumbled against the console in the darkness. She remembered what Bob had taught her, the little reset panel under the right console. Her tiny fingers flipped the switch once. Twice. Nothing. She held her breath, then opened the panel and reached inside, carefully. She hated this part. Wires, cold metal, that one buzzy coil that made her fingers tingle. She felt for the reset tab. Click. The lights flickered. The low hum returned. Then came the voice. Function restored. Reinitializing core systems. Hello again, Ayla. She slumped in relief, giggling just a little. You scared me, Bob. I apologize. System-wide power disruption. I am assessing damage. She waited as the lights stabilized to their soft, bluish glow again. All systems nominal, Bob continued, his tone steady. Except one. The navigational array is offline. We've lost stellar orientation. Ayla didn't gasp. She leaned forward, already thinking. So the inertial reference frame slipped? Is the array completely down or just the auto-recognition software? Sensor input is functional. Starfield mapping was interrupted mid-sync. Manual recalibration is required. Ayla nodded firmly. Okay, let's get visual data on the local field. Wide-angle projection, 240 degrees. Displaying now. The forward screen lit up with a beautiful scatter of stars against the ink-black void. So familiar, so comforting. Ayla's eyes scanned them quickly, absorbing the arrangement like a seasoned navigator. There's Cassiopeia, 5 stars in a wonky W pattern, she said, pointing. And there, that one's Triangulum Australe, near the southern axis. Confirmed. Parallax data matches projected light delay. Ayla was already sliding into the side panel, pulling out the manual recalibration joystick. Let's use the Cassiopeia Triangulum line as baseline A. Give me alignment data for Proxima's last known relative position. Uploading overlay. The screen shifted slightly, adding faint golden lines between stars, showing geometric angles, historical drift rates, and solar wind vectors. There, Ayla said, tapping the screen. If we lock reference angle to Proxima's RAN deck from our last known sync point, we just need to solve for drift delta and compensational vector shift. Easy. She hopped up on her seat to reach the calibration panel and began adjusting the levers, her tiny fingers working quickly but with precision. Sensor sweep pulse in 3, 2, mark. The screen blinked as Bob captured a fresh image of the surrounding stars. Alignment achieved. Stellar position verified. Navigation array is recalibrated. Course? She asked. Locked and stable, resuming trajectory to Proxima Centauri B. Ayla leaned back in the pilot's chair, satisfied. I love when the stars talk back, she said with a grin. They speak very clearly when you know how to listen, Bob replied, a trace of warmth in his voice. Ayla reached into her drawing pouch and pulled out a marker with just enough ink left. On the wall near the cockpit, she sketched a tiny set of stars and a perfect W and labeled it, Cassie, my guide star. Then she whispered to herself, "We're not lost, not as long as I know the sky." And with that, the cat returned to its silent journey, drifting forward through the stars, its walls glowing with childish wonder and the quiet resilience of the last little human on board, the making of new hope. Commander Elara Voss stood at the newly cleared command console of the JD-1, now docked alongside the skeletal remains of Station 9 Tess. The station loomed dark and hollow beyond the viewport, stripped, gutted, a monument to everything lost. But inside the shuttlecraft, the future was being built. "All right," Elara said, tapping the surface of the table. "We're not just rebuilding a shuttle. We're building a starship." The crew gathered around, a ragtag group that now represented the last known survivors of Earth's final great exodus. They listened in silence as Elara laid out the plans Admiral Hurlburt had once scribbled in madness. But this time they would build them with reason, with purpose, and together. Adam Hurlburt was the first to speak. "I want to start with the oxygen scrubbers. I don't believe they failed naturally. Something corrupted them." Elara nodded. "Do it." Adam, already halfway out the door, disappeared into the lab. Within hours he was back, eyes wide with the answer. "It was a synthetic virus," he said, bringing up the results on the nearest display. "Engineered, smart. It targeted the core catalytic materials in the oxygen scrubbers, specifically the silver-coated elements. It didn't attack people, it attacked the air." Dr. Mallory Keene leaned in to study the data. "Let me take a look. If it's synthetic, I might be able to engineer a counteragent." She worked tirelessly for the next 2 days, using every tool the makeshift medbay could offer, and eventually cracked it. A stabilizing compound was synthesized, the virus neutralized. Dawn Shepard, with her steady hand and calm under pressure, led the effort to manually replace the scrubber elements on board 9 Tess. She took a team, Eve, Naya, and John Merrick, and they restored 4 scrubbers, bringing them back online for the first time in weeks. 2 of those were installed aboard the JD-1, now expanding with each passing day. The other 2 were stored in the cargo bay, backup lungs for the long road ahead. Adam Hurlburt, always thinking, always sketching, proposed a plan that would stretch their limited resources to their absolute edge. "We can go bigger," he said. "If we strip the entire station, every corridor, every bracket, every plate of insulation, we can expand the structure, reinforce the hull, add living space. We're not just surviving, we're building a life." And so they did. Over the next 6 weeks, the crew worked in shifts, tearing 9 Tess down to its bones. Every wire, bolt, and fuel cell that wasn't fused into the station's ancient spine was removed, cataloged, repurposed. By the time they were done, Station 9 Tess was a carcass, a hollow monument drifting in silence. But the JD-1 was no longer a shuttle. It had become something new. New hope. 2 new engines were mounted at the rear, giving them a total of 4, balanced, redundant, and powerful enough for long-term acceleration. The nuclear power supply was fully replenished from the station's core reserves. They weren't just leaving orbit, they were bound for the stars. Inside, the upgrades were just as dramatic. A fully redesigned bridge served as their new command center, spacious, sleek, and lined with new sensor equipment. An astrometrics lab was built beside it, where Naya Solis spent hours mapping their course and tracking anomalies. A science engineering bay took shape from the old cargo holds, where John Merrick and Adam now worked side by side, building, repairing, and inventing. A compact but capable sick bay gave Dr. Mallory Keene room to heal and teach. A hydroponics bay was installed, guided by the expertise of Myra and Laura, who had already crossbred 3 varieties of fast-growing fruit hybrids in their first month. Improved sleeping quarters were constructed. Everyone received their own stateroom, except the twins who chose to share for now, with 5 extra rooms left empty, waiting for new life or guests they had not yet met. The galley was rebuilt, large enough for all 10 to sit together, eat together, laugh together. Eve Stidham ran the kitchen like a starship chef, and under Mallory's guidance, began studying medicine in her spare hours, preparing to become a nurse. A fully secured Ark Bay was built into the heart of the ship, housing Earth's last library, the genetic blueprints, cultural records, and human history salvaged from Station 9 Tess. A cargo bay stored 4 years of supplies, carefully rationed, and a fully functional shuttle bay housed 3 drones and a small 2-person shuttlecraft with its own micro-cargo hold. When the final panel was sealed and the last tools stowed away, just under 5 months from when they began, Commander Voss gathered everyone in the new galley. For the first time, they stood not as survivors, but as a crew. She looked them all in the eye, one by one. Then she began. I, Elara Voss, will assume the role as captain of the New Hope. She turned to Dawn. Dawn Shepard, I make you executive officer, second in command. To John, chief engineer. To Adam, assistant engineer and systems specialist. You've earned that title, Adam. To Mallory, chief medical officer. To Eve, head of culinary and nutritional services and nursing apprentice under Dr. Keene. To Naya, lead astrometric navigator. To the twins, Myra and Laura Shepard, junior botanists, hydroponics team, and finally to the boys standing tall and nervous near the back. Eddie Beam, helmsman in training. You're going to learn how to fly this ship. The room filled with warmth, pride, and a spark of something they hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. With systems calibrated, supplies secured, and every corner of the ship claimed, Elara Voss stepped onto the bridge and gave the final command. Set course for Proxima Centauri B. Engage autonav. Begin acceleration. The stars shifted. The ship shuddered once, then glided forward into the dark. Elara thought to herself, this is not a shuttle, not a lifeboat, but this is something greater, a home, a promise, a new hope, edge of a new world. The stars had started to feel closer. Not because they were, but because Proxima Centauri B was no longer just a bright dot in the distance. It was real now, close, days away. Inside Cat, the lights were dimmed to Ayla's preferred dream mode, soft blues and purples that made everything feel like bedtime stories and galaxy maps. Ayla sat in her pilot chair, hugging her knees to her chest. The hum of the ship was steady, like a lullaby. Her newly finished portable communication module rested in her lap, a small silver device shaped like a flattened pebble, warm to the touch and linked directly to Bob. You sure it works from everywhere? She asked, turning it over in her hand. Confirmed, Bob replied in his usual calm tone. Audio, visual, and neural link enabled. If you wander too far, I will still be able to guide you, monitor your vitals, and respond to any emergencies. Even if I fall into a swamp or get chased by a space chicken? Especially then. Ayla giggled, but the sound didn't last long. Her smile faded as she looked out the viewport, where the growing crescent of Proxima Centauri B hovered, wrapped in a soft blue atmosphere and glimmering cloud patterns. I'm scared, Bob. There was a pause. Not a hesitation, just space for her words to breathe. That is completely appropriate, Bob said gently. You are about to become the first human to set foot on a new world. Fear is natural. It is also a sign of respect. She nodded slowly. We've been working so long. What if it's not safe? What if I can't explore it all? It's huge. The last few weeks had been full of data, long hours of analyzing telemetry from the 2 probes they had sent ahead. She had studied maps, temperature charts, and pressure curves. She'd even named a few places herself. And what they'd found was breathtaking. The planet had over twice the habitable surface area of Earth. Forests thicker than rainforests. Desert plateaus that shimmered gold. Mountains that pierced the clouds. Wide, endless plains of rust-colored grass. Even deep ocean trenches that hummed with magnetic pulses. It's like a whole book, she whispered, staring out the window. A really, really long book. And you are its first reader, Bob replied. She smiled again, just a little. But then there were the creatures, predators, big ones. One, captured on a probe's thermal camera, had stomped through the jungle with a heavy tail and serrated teeth that looked very familiar. like dinosaurs, she had said. Comparable in size and behavior to late Cretaceous theropods, Bob confirmed at the time. Also, intelligent ambush strategies and evidence of coordinated hunting. She decided right then that the jungle would not be her starting point. And they'd ruled out the icy region too, unpredictable storms and something massive moving beneath the frozen sea shelf. That left two possibilities: the desert expanse, dry and hot with low predator activity but extreme exposure, or the vast plains, rolling hills, thick grass, temperate climate, and recent signs of bipedal structures. Square-shaped, symmetrical, definitely not natural. They built something, didn't they? She asked the day they found the images. Yes, Bob replied. Something intelligent. That made her stomach do the flip thing again. They're out there, watching maybe waiting. Now, only days from arrival, the question remained. Where would she begin? She looked at the map again, fingers tracing the glowing borders between biomes. I think the plains, she whispered. Maybe they'll talk to me. I believe that's the most balanced region. The climate is survivable, predator levels are low, and if there are other sentient life forms, it is wise to introduce yourself with caution and respect. Ayla stood up and stretched, popping one knee and letting her arms hang loose. Then it's decided. Shall I prepare landing algorithms? She nodded. Yep, but only after we figure out where to put my art supplies. Priorities acknowledged. The stars continued to drift by the viewport as Kat coasted forward. Ayla sat back down, picked up her marker, and began sketching a new image on the panel beside her, a drawing of her new planet, complete with stick figure aliens, mountains, and a big smiley sun. At the bottom she wrote, "My new home." Tune for next week's episode. I will be reading again. Add in the comments what adventure you like to see Ayla have on a future episode. And as always, please like, share, and subscribe.